And I said to my husband, "Do you hear that?" And he said, "Yeah, what is it?" And I gave him his dinner and I looked out the window, and that's when I saw a woman coming out of the house, bent over, gasping for breath. And it was like, yeah, she had saw something that was just devastating.
On July 7th, 2026, a routine evening in Gwyn Oak, Maryland, ended with a crime that left investigators searching for answers. Inside a family home, 15-year-old Giovanna Gigi Myrie and her 9-year-old brother, Steve Allen, were found shot to death. At first, there were few public clues about who was responsible or why the two siblings had been targeted. As detectives examined surveillance footage, cell phone records, and conversations that took place before the killings, a timeline began to emerge. The investigation soon shifted towards someone who had recently become part of Giovanna's life. What initially appeared to be an isolated act of violence revealed a series of events that raised difficult questions about warning signs, relationships, and how quickly a situation can escalate. How did investigators identify their suspect? What evidence connected him to the crime? And what details remain unanswered as the case moves through the justice system? This is the story of the murders of Giovanna Myrie and Steve Allen. Hello, and welcome to Only Crime Stories. Before we continue, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new case. Before their names became part of a homicide investigation, Giovanna Gigi Myrie and her younger brother, Steve Allen, were simply two children growing up in Baltimore County. They shared a home with their family in Gwyn Oak, where daily routines, school, and time together defined their lives far more than anything that would later appear in police reports. Giovanna was 15 years old. Friends remembered her as someone who was easy to talk to and enjoyed spending time with the people closest to her. Like many teenagers, she was beginning to experience new independence, making friends, building relationships, and looking ahead to what came next. Those around her saw a normal teenager navigating the ordinary challenges of high school and adolescence. Steve, only 9 years old, was several years younger than his sister. While their ages placed them in different stages of childhood, they were still growing up under the same roof, surrounded by the same family. Unlike the older teenagers whose lives often become complicated by friendships and relationships, Steve's world was much simpler. Nothing publicly suggested that he had any connection to conflict or danger. From the outside, there was little reason to believe this family would soon become the focus of a major criminal investigation. The neighborhood was not preparing for a tragedy, and the people closest to Giovanna and Steve had no idea that their lives were about to change forever. Yet, behind what appeared to be an ordinary summer, small details were beginning to emerge that would later take on far greater significance. A relationship that had only recently begun would soon become a central focus for detectives, and conversations that once seemed private would later be examined as potential warning signs. Long before investigators assembled evidence or announced an arrest, the events leading to that July evening had already begun to unfold. Understanding those final days means looking closely at the relationship that would soon draw the attention of everyone searching for answers.
We now know the names of the siblings who investigators say were found fatally shot inside their home in Gwyn Oak. Fox 25's Alexa Ashwell is live outside Western High School, where just yesterday the school issued a heartfelt statement. Alexa.
Yeah, Mackenzie, we're told that statement came from the principal of Western High School, acknowledging the passing of one of their students and her brother. Meanwhile, Baltimore County Police confirming still no arrests.
I mean, it's devastating.
Here, a heartfelt message in honor of who Baltimore County Police now confirmed to be 15-year-old Giovanna Myrie and 9-year-old Steve Allen. Just today, the department identifying the siblings who they say were found fatally shot inside of their home in Gwyn Oak around 7:20 this past Tuesday evening. The mother, investigators say, making the heart-wrenching discovery and then calling 911.
I heard the screams and these loud cries. It was heart-wrenching. And I said to my husband, "Do you hear that?" And he said, "Yeah, what is it?" And I gave him his dinner and I looked out the window, and that's when I saw a woman coming out of the house, bent over, gasping for breath. And it was like, yeah, she had saw something that was just devastating. And then you heard more cries and people gathering together. So I knew it was something very serious.
for a shooting in progress. 6102 Tallies Road, 6102 Tallies off of Cardinal Court in Tulsa. Kids shot in the bedroom and daughter shot in the hallway.
By the summer of 2026, Giovanna had recently entered a relationship with 16-year-old Keith Maurice James Jr. It was still new, lasting only a matter of weeks, and to most people around them, it appeared to be another teenage relationship. There was little reason for outsiders to believe it would later become the focus of a homicide investigation. Behind the scenes, however, investigators would eventually uncover conversations that suggested the relationship had become increasingly troubling. According to court documents, Giovanna had shared concerns with at least one friend about the way Keith was behaving. Those private conversations, exchanged before the shootings, would later become an important part of the investigation. Detectives learned that she had described alleged threats tied to jealousy and fears about how Keith might react if she spent time with other boys. At the time, those messages remained between teenagers. They were not public, and there is no indication that anyone could have predicted what investigators would later allege had happened. Another detail also drew investigators' attention. Just days before the killings, one of Giovanna's friends reportedly participated in a FaceTime call involving the couple. During that conversation, the friend allegedly observed Keith holding what appeared to be a handgun. The significance of that moment would not become clear until after detectives began reconstructing the timeline surrounding July 7th. July 7th, 2026, began like any other summer day. Nothing publicly suggested that the evening would end with one of Baltimore County's most disturbing double homicide investigations involving teenagers. As detectives later reconstructed the day's events, they found that Giovanna had been communicating with friends throughout the afternoon. During one conversation, she reportedly mentioned that Keith was expected to come to her house later that day. At the time, there was nothing unusual about the statement. Because he had visited the residence before, his arrival would not have appeared out of place. What happened after that remains known only through the evidence gathered by investigators. By examining cell phone records, detectives were able to place Keith's phone in the area around the time the shootings were believed to have occurred. Surveillance cameras from nearby locations also captured movements that investigators believed were significant in establishing the timeline. Hours later, the family's routine was interrupted when Giovanna and Steve's mother returned home. Instead of finding her children going about their evening, she discovered both of them suffering from multiple gunshot wounds inside the house. Emergency personnel responded to the scene, but neither child survived. The investigation immediately shifted into a homicide case. Officers secured the home, began collecting evidence, and started interviewing potential witnesses while forensic teams documented the scene. At that point, detectives had a timeline beginning to take shape, but they still needed to determine exactly who had entered the home, what had happened inside, and whether the evidence would point to a single suspect. With the crime scene secured, detectives began the process of determining who had been inside the home and how the events of that evening unfolded. Rather than relying on a single piece of evidence, investigators worked to build a timeline using multiple sources that could either support or contradict one another. One of the first areas of focus was digital evidence. Cell phone location records were analyzed to identify devices that had been near the residence during the estimated time of the shootings. Investigators compared those records with surveillance footage collected from cameras positioned throughout the neighborhood. The objective was to establish not only who had been in the area, but also when they arrived and when they left. At the same time, detectives interviewed friends and others who had recently been in contact with Giovanna. Those conversations directed investigators toward messages exchanged before the killings. According to charging documents, the communications described a relationship that had become increasingly concerning in the days leading up to July 7th. When those statements were reviewed alongside the digital evidence, detectives believed they were seeing a consistent pattern. Investigators also confirmed that the person at the center of those messages was familiar with the home, making his presence there on that day easier to evaluate against the evidence being collected. As each piece was added to the timeline, the investigation narrowed. What had started as a search for any possible suspect was becoming focused on one individual. Nearly 2 weeks after the shootings, Baltimore County investigators announced a major development in the case. Their investigation had led them to 16-year-old Keith Maurice James Jr., the teenager who had recently been in a relationship with Giovanna Myrie. Authorities moved to take him into custody in West Baltimore. According to police, the arrest was carried out without incident. While investigators did not publicly disclose every detail supporting their decision, they stated that the evidence collected during the investigation established probable cause to charge him in connection with both killings. Because of the seriousness of the allegations, prosecutors chose to charge Keith as an adult. He faced 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for the death of Giovanna and one for the death of her 9-year-old brother, Steve Allen. The announcement marked the first time investigators publicly identified the person they believed was responsible for the crime. Police also explained that the investigation had involved more than a single witness or one piece of evidence. Instead, detectives had assembled information from surveillance footage, cell phone records, witness interviews, and digital communications before seeking an arrest warrant. Officials emphasized that the case had been built methodically, particularly because the suspect was a juvenile facing adult charges. Following the arrest, the investigation shifted from police headquarters to the courtroom. The allegations that detectives had spent weeks assembling would now begin the legal process, where prosecutors would be required to support each charge with evidence. Keith Maurice James Jr. made his initial court appearance shortly after being taken into custody. During the hearing, he did not make any public statements regarding the allegations. His attorney waived a bond hearing, meaning the court did not consider releasing him while the case moved forward. As a result, he remained in custody pending future proceedings. Although investigators had outlined the evidence they believed connected the suspect to the killings, many details were intentionally withheld from the public. Prosecutors often limit what they disclose before trial to protect the integrity of the case and avoid influencing potential jurors. Because of that, questions about the full sequence of events inside the home remained unanswered. Outside the courtroom, attention remained fixed on the victims and the impact their death had left on those closest to them. While legal preparations continued behind the scenes, family members and the wider community were still coping with the loss of 2 children whose lives had ended only weeks earlier. The criminal case was now entering what could become a lengthy process. Additional hearings, evidence disclosures, and legal arguments were expected before any trial could begin. At the same time, investigators continued examining every remaining detail, determined to ensure that the evidence presented in court accurately reflected what they believed had happened on July 7th. While the legal process began, the impact of the killings continued to unfold beyond the investigation. In Gwyn Oak and surrounding communities, residents followed the case closely as more details about the victims and the circumstances surrounding their deaths became public. Family members, friends, and community members gathered to remember Giovanna, Myrie, and Steve Allen. The focus during these gatherings was on their lives before the investigation began, their connection to family, their presence among friends, and the future they would no longer have the opportunity to experience. The family later held services honoring both siblings. Those who attended came together to pay tribute and support relatives as they faced the aftermath of the tragedy. The gatherings also became moments for the community to reflect on the broader issues raised by the case, including violence involving young people and the warning signs that can appear before serious incidents occur. Law enforcement officials also used the case to highlight concerns surrounding teenage relationships, threats, and access to firearms. Police emphasized the importance of recognizing troubling behavior early and encouraging young people to speak with trusted adults when they feel unsafe. As the community continued mourning, the investigation remained active through the court system. Prosecutors were preparing to present their case, while defense attorneys would eventually have the opportunity to challenge the allegations and evidence. As the case moved forward, investigators and prosecutors continued working to establish the complete timeline of events leading up to the deaths of Giovanna, Myrie, and Steve Allen. While authorities had identified a suspect and filed charges, many details surrounding the moments inside the home had not been released publicly. One of the central questions remained focused on the motive behind the killings. Investigators had examined the relationship between Giovanna and Keith Maurice James Jr., including information provided by witnesses and messages reviewed during the investigation. However, the exact chain of events that led to the shootings was still something prosecutors would need to prove in court. Another major issue involved how the firearm used in the crime was obtained. Authorities discussed the importance of the weapon in their investigation, but specific details about its origin and how it came into the suspect's possession were not fully disclosed. The deaths also raised questions about whether warning signs had been visible before the violence occurred. Investigators reviewed reports of concerning conversations and alleged threats, while the legal system would ultimately determine how those details should be considered. As the legal process continued, attention remained on the evidence that transformed the investigation from an unsolved double homicide into a case centered on one suspect. Detectives had spent days reviewing information from multiple sources, looking for connections between the events before, during, and after the shootings. A major part of the investigation involved digital evidence. Investigators examined electronic records that helped establish movements and communication patterns connected to the day of the killings. These records were compared with information collected from witnesses and video footage gathered from the surrounding area. Surveillance footage became another important element in reconstructing the timeline. Investigators reviewed recordings to identify activity near the residence and determine whether those movements matched other evidence they had collected. Each source provided another piece of information as detectives worked to understand what happened. Witness interviews also played a significant role. Statements from people who knew Giovanna helped investigators learn more about her relationship with Keith and events that occurred before July 7th. Those accounts became part of the broader picture prosecutors would later rely on when presenting the case. While authorities had publicly announced an arrest, they continued to protect many details of the investigation. Certain evidence remained unavailable because it could affect future court proceedings. As investigators continued building the case, the information they collected began forming a clearer timeline of the events surrounding July 7th, 2026. The focus was no longer only on what happened at the scene, but also on the events leading up to that night and the connections between the people involved. According to investigators, several sources of evidence pointed toward Keith Maurice James Jr. as the person responsible for the deaths of Giovanna Myrie and Steve Allen. The evidence included information from electronic devices, location data, surveillance footage, and statements from people familiar with Giovanna's situation. The investigation also examined communications from before the shootings. Messages reviewed by detectives became important because they provided insight into concerns Giovanna had reportedly expressed before her death. Those conversations helped investigators understand the circumstances surrounding the relationship and why it became a key part of the case. Police also looked at Keith's movements before and after the killings. By comparing digital records with witness accounts and video evidence, detectives worked to establish a sequence of events that prosecutors could later present in court. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next case.